Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin into the video. As usual, we're going to be going through the daily happenings in the tech and gaming industry. There have been a couple of interesting developments over the last 24 or so hours. The first one we're going to be starting out with is AMD, because there are yet further indications that their Polaris architecture is entering the final stretch, and we should indeed be seeing some announcements from AMD soon. We'll get into that in just a moment. And then we'll follow that up with PlayStation VR, because some information has been unveiled, which is certainly going to be rather interesting concerning the performance of the PlayStation 4 in virtual reality. But as I mentioned, AMD are going to be first because, well, they're first alphabetically. So, as I'm sure you're probably aware by now, AMD and Nvidia are both beavering away to get its next generation graphics cards ready. The rumours and indications, as we covered yesterday, are that both manufacturers are aiming to get their cards out by, let's say, mid this year. But there has been, of course, some questioning exactly when that's going to happen, but an interesting development has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. So essentially, an AMD board, well, ATI technically, when it comes to this type of thing, they're sometimes branded ATI, has been given the RRA's stamp of approval. Now, what does this mean? It basically means that when certain electronics go into certain areas to be sold, that type of jazz, you basically need to, well, certify them. The RRA, also known as Radio Research Agency, essentially, well, let everyone know that the card is actually safe and is not basically like a nuclear reactor ready to explode in their face. This is very similar to what other countries have to go through as well. America, the United Kingdom, they've all got their own boards which verify that the hardware is safe to use. There's a key difference, however, when it comes to, let's say, South Korea compared to, let's say, the United States. The RRA publishes its certifications. In other words, it is available for anyone to go ahead and check up on the internet. This is completely different from the United States, because in America, that's not the case. This means that in the States, companies could be a bit more sneaky, whereas if they're trying to sell it in, once again, let's say South Korea, this is not the case. Now, what's rather interesting, while it certainly doesn't give the specifications of the hardware, in fact the model name just simply says C91101 with a few certification numbers, and of course the country of origin is China and the manufacturer is ATI Technologies ULC, with a certification date of just a couple of days ago, the 23rd of February. What's interesting is C, then a number, has been with AMD for some bloody long ass time. The Hawaii based cards had C6, Tonga had C7, Fiji had C8. Well, what we are now, that's right, C9. So it's not solid, it's not confirmation, but it's a good indication that once again it is Polaris. Now, what does that really mean? In reality, it means that once again, there's a good chance that AMD are once again quite on track for their card. And we do know that the Baffin XT leak happened just a couple of days ago. If you don't remember what that's about, various cards were spotted being shipped via Zuba. These cards were Baffin XT, Western X3, and Banks Pro and Western Pro, and these were shipping in a variety of different quantities. And now these cards, of course, are most likely engineering samples and had a price per unit of varying different degrees. But let's say these are all, by the way, in Indian rupees. But let's say, for the sake of argument, the Baffin XT had a price per unit of 48,000 rupees, which is not a massive amount, but it's still fairly substantial. And obviously, we don't know what the state of those circuit boards are, because it says printed circuit board assembly, but once again, how many chips are on, what state of those chips, and so on, we just are unable to clarify. All of this, however, is a good indication, like other GPUs before it, whether it was the 300 series, whether it's the 200 series, whether it's Nvidia, it's irrelevant. We've seen this dance before, and it's obviously as companies get closer and closer and closer to the launch of their card, they're basically making sure that they're closer to the final hurdle. Anyway, what about the PlayStation? So, this is quite interesting. There was a recent PlayStation VR conference, and I will actually be going more in depth into this over the next few days. It's a fairly lengthy conference. It was called the Vision Summit 2016, and it was hosted by Unity. Now, a variety of different developers were speaking out regarding, what their plans are for VR. Because obviously it's a collaborative event. It's not just like, hey, Sony are doing their thing and Bob is doing their thing and John is doing their thing. At the end of the day, for developers, they need to make sure that this stuff works, because this technology, particularly with being so early, they need to make sure it's accessible across devices. Now, the interesting thing, and the thing that I'm going to be focused on here, because there have been some concerns, including for myself, that the PlayStation 4 hardware is going to mean a less than optimal experience. However, there's a VR developer, a couple of VR developers actually, who have been creating middleware for the PlayStation 4, and they've demonstrated that the PS4 console is essentially, effectively 60% more powerful than an equally spec'd PC. Now, there are some caveats as to why this is. It's basically because it's purpose-built, it's optimized hardware and operating system. What that basically means is that the hardware is, built just for gaming. Developers know that the PS4 hardware, they know what they're developing for. They don't need to worry about optimizing for a variety of different pieces of hardware. Now, I do have a couple of questions regarding that, and that is primarily what APIs and other things what they're comparing that to. Because as we're seeing with the PC, there's massive increases in performance with DirectX 12, and this is coming on all the time because DX12 games at the moment haven't even been fully implemented yet. And we're starting to see really asynchronous compute engines and other such things become normal now for DirectX 12. Look at what's happening in the news at the moment with Ashes of the Singularity DX12 benchmarks. This is particularly important because multi-adapters are becoming much better supported with DX12. It means that we can see, let's say, an AMD card work quite happily alongside an Nvidia card, which is something that simply could not happen before. However, despite the fact that I've waxed lyrically about that for the last couple of minutes, generally speaking, PC hardware is very unoptimized. So they basically are comparing the hardware for the PlayStation 4 against a GTX 970 with a Rift, which is pretty damn impressive. And this is actually according to also a developer on Reddit. He says, and I quote, PSVR is extremely close to being on par with Vive and Rift with a GTX 970 based on the tests I've done. The team from Epic, Nick and Tom, have also stated the same in at least one of their VR Twitch streams. And if your app runs at 90Hz on a PC with a GTX 970, you'd be very close to 60 on the PS4. And with 120 reprojection applied, it's glassy smooth. So there is definitely a difference in terms of frame rate. The PC does have an advantage, but at least for the recommended hardware for PC, you definitely are not that far behind with a PlayStation 4. There are a couple of caveats. Aside from that, of course, with the next generation of GPUs popping out for the next year or so for the PC, let's say the Polaris architecture when it's released later on, there's definitely going to be quite a substantial boost in PC performance. But for now, with DirectX 11, I'm assuming as a comparison point, the PS4 is handling itself rather well. So it's kind of good news. I'm happy about this. It means that the PlayStation 4, the hardware, from what I've been told, I've not used a PSVR piece of hardware, it looks like it's a pretty solid device. So this is all good news, in my opinion, if you're optimistic about virtual reality. Finally, and this is something that I believe we kind of knew, but it's just a confirmation of such, The breakout box, which has of course been photographed and much talked over, doesn't do anything in terms of providing extra processing power apart from one thing. It does actually process 3D audio. So what that means is the GPU/CPU of the PlayStation 4 doesn't actually need to spend any cycles processing audio. What that means, of course, is that those additional cycles can be used on gaming, which is good. Basically means you're going to get a better gaming experience. Anyway, as I said, I'll probably be doing an analysis over this of the next couple of days, depending on how complex it is. I've not had time to watch the entire video. I've watched snippets at the moment, but I'll probably do something over the next couple of days for this weekend. But for now, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.